Were the deadly Texas floods earlier this month caused by cloud seeding? Good afternoon. You're watching Filibusted Live. I'm Reese Black, joined by Doug Smith today, and we're covering conspiracy theories on geoengineering and weather manipulation. We're also going to be covering what the mainstream media wants you to believe about these things. And so, no matter what you believe, this should be an interesting episode for you. I think we're taking a level headed approach to analyzing the theories and also the official narrative about what's going on. And so, whatever you believe about these things, please comment below. I'd love to see your best explanations and evidence for what's happening. And I'd also want to see a respectful discussion in the comments, hopefully. Real fast before we get started, I do want to say that our prayers have been going out to the communities that have been affected by the floods that occurred earlier this month, especially those who lost their loved ones. We're not trying to politicize a disaster over here, but this flood has brought to the forefront of the political discussion the geoengineering debate, essentially. The geoengineering, is it occurring? Is it not occurring? And that's been brought forth. We've already seen a bill being put forth now, also after the floods occurred, that is related to this. We'll get into that later. So we're going to be breaking down what's going on in this general topic of weather manipulation and also how it relates, of course, to the flooding here in Texas. So without further ado, our master conspiracy theorist today, Doug, is going to be giving us a quick overview of a lot of the weather conspiracy theories. I say quick, you can talk as long as you want, Doug, but I just know we don't have time for covering absolutely everything. So that's why I say quick. So give us an overview of the conspiracy theories. Later on, I'll be covering a lot more things specifically related to the floods in Texas, as well as the official narrative behind these things.
Yeah, so I actually do want to make it quick because, man, this topic could get real lengthy real fast, and we kind of already have a little bit of that going on. So I'm just going to break down the basic conspiracy theories that surround weather manipulation, what they are, and a little quick explanation of what that means for us. But I'm not going to get too much into my own opinion on it. I really am trying to keep it just simple, straightforward. Here's what it is. Here's what's going on. Of course, there's going to be a little bit of opinion in there because I can't help it. But anyway, so we're going to start with cloud seeding, of course. Cloud seeding is a very simple concept, and it's very real. It is simply the process of using some type of aerial machine, typically a drone, to hover above clouds and seed them with silver iodide, thus causing them to become heavier, quote unquote, and drop at the seeder's discretion. So basically, they just go above the clouds, seed it with silver iodide, which is a powder substance that they spread over the top of a cloud, and it literally makes it rain. Because this technology is available, people were quick to point at it as the cause of the floods that we are talking about in this episode, specifically the ones here in Texas. So just 2 days before the floods in Texas, the company that Reese is going to go into a little bit more detail on later, called Rainmaker Technology, is the one that seeded these clouds. And it was 2 days before the flood started happening. Meteorologists claimed that this operation had nothing to do with the flooding. And according to professionals in the field, rainmaking cannot trigger this kind of flash flooding that we saw. It was too much. They're saying there's no possible way that it could have done this. Mm-hmm. But before that, videos spread online. I couldn't help but notice this on X. I don't know if you can, we're going to watch this one. Maybe not watch it, but I don't know if you can see the color of this water here. People were saying that the rain was blue, and they were seeing it collecting in certain areas and claiming it to have this bluish, purplish tint to it. So I thought that was an interesting little conspiracy theory. It is being connected to the cloud seeding, of course, but as always, you can not always trust everything that you see online, especially on X. So who knows what this really is? I'm just pointing it out. Anyway, we're going to move on. So cloud seeding is not the same as these other weather manipulation conspiracy theories that I'm going to go into. The one that it might get confused with, the top one that it gets confused with, is chemtrails. Chemtrails are not the same as contrails. A contrail is simply the occurrence of a water vapor that exits the aircraft at high altitudes. That is all. Those are very real. Nobody really debates the existence of those because it's a thing. Like everybody says that's there. It's the chemtrail that is the controversial thing. So chemtrails are most often associated with the theory that planes are intentionally dispersing chemicals into the sky. Chemicals, not just water droplets.
Right.
This is a weather manipulation tactic that is more aggressive than cloud seeding. And this is all according to the conspiracy theory. The chemtrail conspiracy addresses a more wide range of purported anomalies with claims that the population is either being vaccinated or poisoned with barium and aluminum particles. And that theory often points out to the chemical name coming to read Baal, Baal. So I thought that was, it's a fun bonus.
It is a fun bonus. I did have to, I kind of had to crack up myself a little bit because I noticed that there's a common occurrence with conspiracy theories. They really like to insert anything that has to do with Baal. I just see
Yeah.
a few times. So if like there's a connection, like, and this spells Baal. It's kind of like the 666, the Christian Mark of the Beast thing. But I've noticed that the Baal specifically is like a popular.
It is an
for
interesting little like side note that happens, but it is also somewhat true. Like I read an article this morning, had nothing to do with chemtrails, but there is a mixture of barium and aluminum that is in like plastics and things like that. And there's more than that, obviously, but that is within it. And they were doing a study on like how it affected pregnant women and all that. So it is a thing, but it whether or not that's as big of a thing as people say it is, I'll leave that up to our viewers' discretion. But I just thought it was fun to point out. And also there is the evidence that aluminum companies sell their shards of aluminum that's cut from their projects. They sell it to other companies, and it's like a don't ask type of thing. Like don't ask, don't tell. They just don't say. They have no idea what the companies that they're selling it to are doing with it. I don't know, weird stuff, but not very provable. So the other problem with the chemtrails that people point out is that it is blocking the sun, and it is justified by cloud brightening and aerosol injection. Those are the two words that they use, or terms that they use for it. So the chemtrail conspiracy is regularly argued and regularly debunked or proved, however you look at it online. It's all over the place. It'll just take one quick Google search to find all that. So we don't need to go into that too much. Chemtrail conspiracy alleges that the streaks in the sky are not natural and often point to the days of yore when the skies did not have as much covering, which I do remember those days too. Regardless of the validity of chemtrail conspiracy, the technology exists. And this was something that I thought was important to point out. It has a different name, but the technology is there. And also whether or not they're using aluminum and barium is kind of a hard thing to find. They don't really say what chemicals they're putting or they're wanting to put in the sky, but there are some. So it has a different name. It's called solar radiation modification, which is proposed by government entities such as NOAA as a potential to decrease worldwide average temperatures. By NOAA's own admission, it is the process of utilizing large-scale actions with the use of spraying aerosols into the sky.
We've talked about this before. We talked because Bill Gates is a proponent of this. He has they're doing a study in the UK right now, I believe. That was in the news, saying the UK was like getting on board with experimenting to see, can we block out the sun just a little bit by releasing things into the atmosphere. And so it is kind of crazy because you have this so-called conspiracy theory of people saying, hey, people are doing this. And then you have like, no, it's not happening.
Right.
But then you have people saying, but we do want to do it, though. We want to do it. So please let us do this. So it's like, okay, that's crazy.
It's kind of hilarious, the contradictions that exist in this world. Like, well, we have the technology, but we're certainly not doing it. Right. Okay. So cloud seeding is also not the same as radio wave emissions for weather control. And that is called HARP. I don't know if our viewers have heard of this or not, but it was one of my favorite topics way back in the day. HARP stands for High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program. It's based in Gacona, Alaska. HARP was rumored to have closed its doors, but it actually just moved from the U.S. Air Force to the University of Alaska Fairbanks and continues its operations. It is the world's most capable, high-power, high-frequency transmitter for study of the ionosphere. HARP has been the fuel for conspiracy theories for years, being blamed for worldwide phenomena such as earthquakes, hurricanes, inexplicable humming noises, and anomalies in the aurora borealis. Another fun side note on this one is that HAARP actually did successfully create an artificial aurora borealis in 2005.
That's crazy.
Weird, huh? Especially pair that with the recent, like what the last few years we've had the aurora borealis coming down further into our hemisphere more than normal. Like we've seen it here in Texas, which is just a weird thought to me. But
Mhm.
I don't know about that one, man. Anyway, HAARP is generally more accused of major worldwide events or being the cause of major worldwide events such as the Haiti earthquake in 2010 or Fukushima in 2011. What does not help these conspiracies is that all too often, weather disasters just so happen to be in places that benefit someone, namely people looking to mine certain resources in areas that didn't want them to previously. And then, oh, look, a storm. I guess we can mine here now. But is this a chicken or an egg situation? That's the question for you guys. Which one came first? Did the certain entities take advantage of weather torn places and then go ahead and do like a make the best of it approach? Or did certain entities collude with weather manipulators in order to clear out areas that they already knew to be rich in some needed resource? That is a question for you guys to figure out. At the end of the day, the possibility of all of these is not a conspiracy. It is a fact. These things are possible. It's whether or not they're being used for what we think they're being used for is the question. So, when does a theory stop being a theory? It's either when the government admits to it or the possibility becomes a reality. And that is all I've got for you guys.
Thank you, Doug. Thanks for covering these. The
Yeah.
HAARP one is really interesting to me. I don't know much. I know I saw a little bit of stuff about it. I don't know much about the whole radio wave emissions for weather control, the theories behind that. But that I'll have to look into that myself later at some point. But today we're going to be covering the rest of this episode. I'm basically just going to be talking about cloud seeding for the most part. So
Well,
that's what I'm
cloud
going to get into.
seeding leads to all of these clearly, because I think it just opens up the discussion that we need to be having about weather manipulation in general. It doesn't
Absolutely.
matter how it's happening. Maybe we should stop messing with the weather.
Well, that's why we're talking about this today. So thanks for joining in.
Yeah.
I'm gonna finish the rest of this one by myself, but let's get into cloud seeding and talk about the specific instance in Texas. I'm gonna turn my screen on, but thank you, Doug. Okay, going into the specific instance that we are, of course, that's brought all this up to our forefront, which is the Texas flooding. So let's get into what we know. So Doug has been really helpful, helped us cover some of the conspiracy theories, and then, of course, how this touched on. You notice not all this has to do with cloud seeding or specifically about this event in Texas, but this was a catalyst for pushing forth all of the conspiracy theories that have already been going on and the evidence that people have been bringing forth of like this stuff is occurring. We need to be talking about it. And it just brought it into the forefront. So for a little bit though, I want to talk about things that are not even conspiracy theories or things that whether they have evidence or not. I want to talk about things that are confirmed that we know 100% for a fact. And so this is a little bit interesting. So let's talk about cloud seeding. So this company, Rainmaker, that has gotten all this attention, is a cloud seeding company. That is what they do. And they say on their website that cloud seeding has been around for a long time. The sources that I found, pretty much everybody agrees we started cloud seeding, experimenting back in the 1940s. So that's been going on for a while. But they do say on their website here that in the 70s, the cloud seeding kind of started to fizzle out, right? So that's probably more of the official narrative is cloud seeding sort of started to fizzle out in the 70s. This company, Rainmaker, they distinguish themselves from previous cloud seeding initiatives with their new monitoring technology. So they're claiming to have more accurate access to the exact effects that their cloud seeding is having. So then more accurate analysis. So they have better technology for checking out where exactly their cloud seeding, what it's affecting, how much rain it's causing, and all that kind of stuff. Where they said that previous initiatives had a hard time. Previous initiatives could, cloud seed, but they wouldn't necessarily know what the end result of their cloud seeding was. So let's take a look at a couple things on their website, and then we'll get into the how they have been blamed for Texas and the response to that. But the first, you see here their mission on their webpage. They say increasing global consumption and changing climate patterns are accelerating the depletion of fresh water resources. Humanity is responsible for protecting the vitality of the natural world and civilization. Rainmaker's precipitation enhancement technology is the only immediate scalable solution to create abundant fresh water. So that is their mission. Their stated goal is to create abundant fresh water. Anywhere we need abundant fresh water, they say we're having a lack of abundant fresh water. We need more of it. And obviously, I think that you could argue that they are trying to solve a real problem. If there's droughts, if there's lack of fresh water, which we've seen in different places, they're trying to find a way to solve that issue, right? I just a small note here. I know probably a lot of people are really for understandable reasons, there's reasons to be skeptical of Rainmaker and what they're doing. I do want to just say, though, I'm not completely against humans specifically manipulating the earth. I do think humans have an obvious effect on the earth, and we have a responsibility to steward the planet. So I do believe it's possible to have positive effects on the earth. For instance, there's nothing wrong with terraforming deserts. There's different ways humans can terraform deserts, literally just by planting more trees and doing certain irrigation projects, and you can terraform a desert right into a forest. That's something that humans can do. There's nothing really wrong with that. In fact, I think we can have good effects on the planet, both for the planet and also for ourselves as humans. But I just want to say that we always have to be very careful about the potential for side effects, right? So we're going to get into some of the side effects that could occur from cloud seeding. So that's kind of my general take. I'm not completely against manipulating the planet, manipulating the weather, manipulating these kinds of things. I'm mainly against the bad side effects that could come from it. And then, of course, obviously people using them for nefarious means. So jumping on to the next page of their website, I just thought this was really interesting. They laid out some of the history here. They say, in the past, the United States invented and pioneered precipitation enhancement in the mid-20th century. Until the 1970s, federal agencies conducted extensive regional precipitation enhancement programs to enhance water supplies and mitigate storms. So right there, they're claiming that we have been doing weather manipulation, but then it kind of started to fizzle out in the 1970s. That's what they say. Legacy technology, however, made precipitation enhancement's effectiveness difficult to assess. So they're saying we're better at assessing it now. Present, as the U.S. divested, the Chinese government invested billions into precipitation enhancement operation to diminish the impacts of drought, sustained desert agriculture, and fight pollution. China is now the global leader in the field. And they're absolutely correct about this. China has no issue with weather manipulation, and they're all for it. And so they've been doing obviously a lot more than we've been doing here in the United States. I would argue, at least it's easier to tell that they're doing it there. The United States today has a highly experienced but technologically outmatched precipitation enhancement industry. Rainmaker brings the frontier of precipitation enhancement capabilities back home. So that's their goal. They're saying China's doing this better than we are. We want to get back in and be doing this for good purposes. Again, they're claiming to be doing this for good purposes. So if you trust them, right, then no problems there. They do have a nice little chart here I thought was cool, showing about how cloud seeding works. But we're not getting to get into the details of exactly how cloud seeding works. So you can look that up because I've got a lot of information to get through. But before I get into Texas, I'm going to talk about the potential downsides to cloud seeding. And again, this isn't conspiratorial. This is just like completely out in the open, known scientists looking at cloud seeding saying, okay, this looks like it could be a good idea, but we do have some concerns. So here are the completely normal mainstream concerns about cloud seeding here. Not conspiratorial, just mainstream not theories, mainstream concerns here. Number one, human and environmental health concerns. From what I could find, basically all cloud seeding is done with silver iodide. I don't know a whole lot about silver iodide, but from one study that I saw here, there is a claim that the use of silver iodide has a high probability of being toxic for the environment and then eventually for humans. So the concern behind the study is that over enough time, if we keep dumping silver iodide on top of these clouds and then it gets in the atmosphere and then it pours down in the rain into the soil, we're going to eventually have a toxic buildup of all of this stuff, right? And so I just wanted to point out that this is Earth weather.org, normal scientific website. And they talk about how countries have used cloud seeding, and they also talk about some of the potential, effects of it. So you have that. You have the human environmental health concerns from that chemical that's being used, right? Another thing that they bring up is that just it could be disturbing natural weather patterns. So the idea is that in attempting to artificially cause rain in some areas, we actually end up stealing rain from other areas. So we're causing it to rain more over here, but it's actually stealing the moisture in the atmosphere away from where the rain would naturally have gone, right? The naturally occurring weather patterns. So it's not just like producing new water out of nothing. It is actually using the water in the atmosphere, and you're just directing it where you're concentrating it where you want it to go. So what does that mean? Well, it means that you're actually taking water from where it would have naturally gone without that interference, right? And so if enough of that is done, the concern is, well, maybe what if you start causing droughts in other areas where they're not doing cloud seeding, where you're doing cloud seeding here, now you get lots of rain, and now there's droughts where there's not cloud seeding occurring. So that's a concern. There's also it also lists floods and landslides. Floods and landslides are a legitimate concern. If you have too much rain, right, you can cause that kind of damage. So we'll get into that in a second. And the last one is ethical and political concerns. Ethical and political concerns because of the stealing the rain situation. If one country does an enormous amount of cloud seeding, what if they end up stealing the clouds and the rain from other countries, right? And so then you have a conflict occurring there. And I do want to point out again that we're talking about weather manipulation used in the past and also used currently. This is a legitimate site, earth.org. Let's see what they have to say about weather manipulation. They say that's been used in history and also being used right now. Quote, the historical dimension of this debate resonates with events like Operation Popeye during Vietnam War, where weather modification was a military tool. So this has been declassified. We know that they used weather modification during the Vietnam conflict. The extended moon-sun season and resulting floods led to an international treaty in 1977 prohibiting the military use of weather modification. So we have a treaty saying you can't do this for military purposes. Whether people are following that treaty or not, I have no idea. Countries like the Russian Federation and Thailand are successfully using it for suppressing heat waves and wildfires. So Russia and Thailand are doing this, while in the USA, China, and Australia are applying its potential for maximizing water utilization during rainfall for drought mitigation. In the United Arab Emirates, the technique is actively used to expand its agricultural capabilities and battle extreme heat. So those are just some of the countries that are already doing cloud seeding. A lot of countries, like a lot of cloud seeding occurring. Let's talk about private companies. So private companies actively employ it, especially in hail-prone areas where insurance companies fund projects to minimize property damage. I thought these two paragraphs were just crazy to me. This might not be insane to y'all, but the amount of mainstream stuff I've seen where they say the weather modification isn't a big deal, it's not happening. So to have legitimate scientific sites just saying outright yeah, people are doing this, they do it all the time, to me it's just like, oh, this is kind of crazy, because it does, well, I'm going to get into it later, but it does end up feeling like there's an attempt to suppress people talking about weather manipulation. But if you look at some of the evidence or some of the claims from legitimate sources, they just say, yeah, no, this is happening. So we have private companies using it, and then in regions like Canada's Alberta, cloud seeding adjusts the composition of hail-producing clouds to minimize damage. Oh yeah, I just thought this was crazy. The application span various domains from generating rainfall for drought, enhancing snowfall at ski resorts, to managing hail and agriculture. So weather manipulation, it's here. The future is here. We're doing it. We're absolutely doing it. Private companies are doing it. Nations are doing it. They have multiple examples of uses that are currently are here that they're using it for, right? And so I just think that's really interesting. So I've already talked about the potential downsides to this, right? And it's being used. So let's finally get into the Texas situation, okay? And we're going to be going all kinds of places here, so hang with me. So this is what occurred. Obviously, we know the floods that occurred in Texas. So let's talk about Rainmaker's reaction to this and how their claim that they had nothing to do with the floods and the evidence that they put forth. Okay, so the Rainmaker CEO, this guy, his name's Augustus Dorico. I'm going to be calling him Augustus, just in case I'm pronouncing his last name incorrectly. So he actually confirmed. I saw this where people were, as soon as the floods happened, people were saying it was caused by cloud seeding that occurred on July 2nd. And lo and behold, he confirmed that yes, they were doing cloud seeding 2 days before on July 2nd in Karnes County. But he also provides evidence and specifically states that it did not cause the floods. So I'm going to pull up a map here just so, because I wasn't aware that we have Karnes County down here and we have Kerr County where much of the flooding occurred, and they are about 150 miles from each other. But, not super, super far away from each other, but a little bit ways away from each other. So that is the two places that we're talking about here. So Karnes County is where the cloud seeding occurred. Kerr County is where much of the flooding occurred. And so it's 150 miles away. And if I'm just going to read a little bit of what he says about what they were doing. And so he says, did Rainmaker conduct any operations that could have impacted the floods? He says no. So the last seeding mission prior to the July 4th event was during the early afternoon of July 2nd, where a brief cloud seeding mission was flown over the eastern portions of south central Texas, and 2 clouds were seeded. And if you look at his flight logs down here, the claim is that they were only cloud seeding for 20 minutes. So small cloud seeding operation. And I saw this from other claims as well, that this was supposed to be a very, very tiny cloud seeding operation that occurred, not a major cloud seeding operation, a very small one. And then he continues and he says, natural clouds typically have lifespans of 30 minutes to a few hours at most, with even the most persistent storms systems rarely maintaining the same cloud structure for more than 12 to 18 hours. The clouds that were seeded on July 2nd dissipated over 24 hours prior to the developing storm complex. So what he's saying is that, yes, they did seed a couple of clouds, but they dissipated, he said, between 3 and 4 p.m. They dissipated on July 2nd between 3 and 4 p.m., and they were already gone. So they were already gone before any of the major rainfall that we see. So those are the claims that he's making. I'm going to give you guys my take on all this later, but I want to give everything that he has said and the evidence that he's shown. And then, of course, he does make this claim that a senior meteorologist observed an unusually high moisture content prior to the event's arrival using the National Weather Service sounding data. And so he goes on to explain essentially that they got the warning that there was a thunderstorm developing and there was this massive storm that was going to come in. And down here, he talks about how they have an agreement with the Texas Department of Licensing and Regulations that says essentially if there's going to be a severe thunderstorm kicking up in the area, they have to stop what they're doing. So that way they're not adding to it, right? So if there's people, the National Weather Service is saying, hey, looks like there's going to be a severe thunderstorm in this area, they have to stop everything that they're doing. And so he says they did that. They stopped everything they were doing. That was the last thing that they did. It was a whole 2 days before, 20 minutes of cloud seeding, 2 clouds, and nothing really came of that. So that's a claim. He does provide some evidence for it. And of course, he asks down here at the bottom, he says, we want to have full transparency and we want, meteorologists to weigh in on this and all that kind of stuff. And so I'm going to get into the meteorologist's opinion on this, but his last quote here that he did in an interview, because he did several interviews defending his company and, of course, trying to lay out the evidence that their cloud seeding had nothing to do with this event. He says the biggest and best cloud seeding operations we've seen to date have produced tens of millions and maximally like 100 million gallons of precipitation. So he said that's the most that their cloud seeding has ever produced. He said, talking about the floods in Texas, and what caused it, he said, we saw an excess of 1 trillion gallons of precipitation from that flood. Not only could cloud seeding not have caused this, but the aerosols that we dispersed days prior could not have persisted in the atmosphere long enough to have had any consequence on the storm. So that's his claims, that they've only ever at max gotten 100 million gallons to drop, and their aerosols would have dispersed and not affected the storm. And then the storm comes in and drops like 1 trillion gallons, right? So he's saying they're not related to each other whatsoever. And meteorologists have weighed in on this. So veteran Houston meteorologist Travis Herzog, he weighed in on the claims supporting the CEO's claims. He says cloud seeding cannot create a storm of this magnitude or size. In fact, cloud seeding can't even create a single cloud. All it can do is take an existing cloud and enhance the rainfall up to 20%. And even this is on the high end. So again, as Doug talked about earlier, the way that cloud seeding works is you go and you drop things on existing clouds, right? So you're enhancing existing clouds' ability to cause rain, not like creating brand new clouds. So the meteorologists that have all weighed in on this have all supported the CEO's claims and said, yeah, the cloud seeding wasn't the problem. It wasn't. What did cause it though? So they give an example. They give not example. They give a explanation what caused it, which I'm going to show a little video here. So this is the meteorologist's explanation. And they say, I'm going to give the meteorologist explanation, and then I'll give the layman's explanation. Meteorologist's explanation: a quote, a stalled mesoscale convective vortex fueled by remnant tropical moisture, not cloud seeding. So in layman's terms, what they're talking about here is a tropical storm Barry, came into Mexico, and then it collided with another storm. I'll play this video real fast here so you can see this. Tropical storm comes into Mexico, collides with another storm in Mexico, and then eventually pushes all that water over the central Texas, and it stalls for some reason. I don't know why. It stalls, weather patterns. I'm not saying I know all this stuff. I'm just trying to give you the synopsis of what their explanation is. And it stalls over central Texas and dumps all this rain. And I will admit, I think all of this is pretty believable to me. It is, looking at the weather patterns. And yeah, we have this massive amount of water coming in from this tropical storm, colliding with something that's happening in Mexico. So somewhat believable, pretty believable to me, I would say. Before I give my final synopsis of Rainmaker and whether or not they affected this situation, I want to talk about the mainstream media's response to this, because I think that this is kind of what's most important. It might just sound like a little bit of a crazy claim. I do think there's a lot of evidence being shown, a lot of debunking happening around the cloud seeding claims to this one specific event. But I think it's really crucial to understand how the mainstream media is framing this and why. I'm going to talk about why they're framing it in a very specific way. So I'm going to hone in on this article, because this article is like a blueprint for the mainstream media, not just for this specific kind of like official narrative versus the conspiracy theories that are going on, but for related to weather modification, but like this is their blueprint kind of for everything, for every sort of, anytime there's an official narrative and then you have conspiracy theories that are kind of trying to poke some holes in that narrative and bring up things of like, well, what about this? What about that? And I just think this is really fascinating, because they admit some things in this article that are just, to me, are just absolutely mind-blowing. So let's talk about two different paragraphs here that can sum up basically all the mainstream media's response. And so the first one is going to be trying to debunk false claims, okay? And there's nothing wrong with that, but that's the first one that we're going to look at here. This paragraph down here says, the flurry of allegations were quickly debunked, with a number of independent scientists saying that the company's actions could not have produced anywhere close to the amount of rain that triggered the flood. And I will say this article does a pretty good job of showing evidence for that. I brought up some of the evidence before, both by Rainmaker and also by independent meteorologists who have said, hey, this is how cloud seeding works. This is what they were doing. This is when it dissipated. And then here's what actually caused the flooding. And I think that's great. I think that when something occurs like this, we should be looking for actual real evidence of, what caused this thing. Is it just a natural occurrence, or is there something else going on? So I have no problem with the mainstream media, trying to weigh in with actual meteorologists, trying to look at the weather and trying to look at the pros and cons of cloud seeding and showing that kind of evidence. I think that's great. However, there's something more nefarious occurring in this article very quickly, much more nefarious. And I'll show that right here. Few paragraphs down. I'm just going to read this whole paragraph here. It says, but in some ways, even though these things were debunked, but in some ways, the damage was done. Conspiracy theorists who have long alleged that deep state Democrats are controlling the weather now had a real incident to point to. And researchers, companies, and experts working to study and perform weather modification and geoengineering practices, which some will be needed as climate change worsens. Some say will be needed as climate change worsens, now have an even bigger hurdle to overcome. So let me break this down. I could not believe how bold-faced they were about this. In this same paragraph, they are criticizing people for having conspiracy theories about weather modification. They're criticizing people for talking about weather modification in a negative way. They're saying these are just conspiracy theories you guys are having about weather modification. And in this same exact paragraph, they say the reason this is bad is because real weather manipulation is happening. Real geoengineering is absolutely happening, and it's a good thing, and we need it to save us from climate change. And so it's kind of like gaslighting to an nth degree I can't even describe, because in the same paragraph they say that this is just conspiracy theories. There's no geoengineering happening. This is just conspiracy theories. And then they say geoengineering is happening. Researchers, companies, experts working to study and perform it. Weather modification engineer, they're saying it is occurring. And then they say why it needs to occur, which is climate change. We need to be able to save ourselves from climate change. And now, because people are talking badly about us, this is going to be a bigger hurdle for them to overcome. It's absolutely insane. So the mainstream media response is basically, shut up, you stupid conspiracy theorists. You talking badly about geoengineering is going to make it harder for the experts to perform geoengineering to save the planet from climate change. And so this article is also very critical of Representative MTG. And so probably everybody knows by now, Representative MTG announced a bill making it illegal to do geoengineering. So again, the attack on her in this article, I think, is kind of bizarre, because we're coming from like two contradictory angles. They're coming from one, the angle of, oh, this person's just a crazy conspiracy theorist, by even bringing up this bill and saying, well, we need this. We need to make it illegal to do this kind of geoengineering, right? But then it's like, well, why are you criticizing them? And it's the real reason is because they don't want to make geoengineering illegal, because they want to be able to use it in order to save us from climate change. And they admit that in the article. And so it's so crazy, because it's like, if geoengineering wasn't happening and it wasn't dangerous, then why is it a problem for us to introduce a bill saying we are going to make sure that nothing dangerous is occurring? We're going to stop any dangerous geoengineering, for the government to intentionally look into that and decide, what they want to do with the geoengineering problem. Why is that a problem if it's not occurring? It's like, well, it is occurring, at least to some degree. It must be occurring. And they even admit that in the article it's occurring. And that's why they're mainly critical of MTG putting forth this bill, is because they don't want it to stop. They want to be able to have a level of it at some. That's because the official narrative, as I brought out before, is that climate change is occurring, and thus we need, at some, whether we're doing it right now or not, and we're not doing it, we promise, but we will need geoengineering at some point to save us from climate change. That's the official narrative. So real fast summary: conspiracy theory narrative, geoengineering is occurring, at least to some degree, right? That's what the conspiracy theorists will say. It's occurring, at least to some degree. The official narrative is, one, climate change is caused by fossil fuels, is destroying the planet. And of course, this is false, and we've debunked this on earlier episodes. At the end, I'll point you to an episode where we talk about climate change and debunk some of the major claims that fossil fuels is somehow destroying the planet. And we get into some of that narrative, right? The second claim is that geoengineering is not really happening, but then they also claim that it is happening, but it's not a big deal. Don't worry about it. And then the third claim is that people need to stop negatively talking about geoengineering, because that's going to make it harder for scientists to perform the necessary geoengineering we need to save the planet from climate change. And so you see both camps of people actually believe that geoengineering is occurring. It's just crazy. You have one camp that thinks that it's dangerous, and you have the other camp that thinks, no, this is necessary. We need it to occur because of climate change. And so I think at this point, I'm like beyond convinced. It's like, well, obviously it's occurring, at least to some level, because you have both groups of people saying that it is occurring, or at least it needs to occur. And we know for the past, the official narrative situation we've seen over and over and over again, we've seen this. The official narrative people come out saying, no, this thing's not occurring. It's not occurring. And then eventually, years later, they'll say, okay, it is occurring, but no, they'll say, oh, well, if it did occur, it would be a good thing. It would be a good thing if it did occur, but it's not occurring right now. And they're already saying that, but they're already moving over into the, okay, yeah, we are kind of doing it. It is actually happening. But again, this is a good thing, right? So I know I'm getting a little lengthy here, so I'm going to wrap this up. But my personal breakdown of all this, I have to look back to the quote from Lyndon B. Johnson, one of our former presidents, who said, "He who controls the weather will control the world." That's a real quote from our former president, who was quite interested in weather control. We know cloud seeding was used in the Vietnam conflict. I'm not an expert on any of this, but there are plenty of confirmed uses both in the past and also present by nations and by private companies, at the very least, using cloud seeding. So this is a serious thing we need to be talking about. And it shows, if they're using cloud seeding, then why would they not use other forms of geoengineering as well? If they're already using one, then the rest of it is obviously open. So we know that this is occurring at least at some level. How severe, I don't know, but it must be occurring at some level. And it's not ridiculous to believe that could be dangerous effects. So I would say, don't believe the mainstream narrative that says that there's nothing dangerous occurring, when you have people like Bill Gates who are out here blatantly saying, boldly saying, and funding research in UK, saying we need to block out the sun to save us from this this problem with global warming, right? Where you have this whole situation where you have the cure end up being much more severe than the disease, so I'll just leave that out there. So if you look into it, there are actually lots of high profile climate activists, not just Bill Gates, people with major governmental influence, who are openly calling for weather manipulation to solve the climate change, whether it's already occurring or not, right? So there's definitely some evidence out there, beyond the Rainmaker company. The Rainmaker company is just one, but there's definitely evidence out there that there's already weather manipulation occurring. And so this is a pattern that I think you see with these kind of conspiracy theory sort of stuff. So let's bring up the Texas floods, and I'll give my analysis of the Texas floods. So you have a conspiracy theory that gets brought up as a possible explanation for something occurring. So Texas floods occurs, then of course it brings forth all the conspiracy theories begin to be put forth, ones that have already been out there, but now they're used as an explanation. And the mainstream media is quick to rush in and debunk it, right? And they debunk it and they support the official narrative. But then what they'll do is, in the future, they will use this as a moment of saying, well, we proved weather manipulation untrue, right? Look back to the Texas floods. We proved that the Texas floods wasn't caused by cloud seeding. And so now in the future, anytime anybody brings up weather manipulation like MTG or anybody else, that is what people are going to point back to. They're going to say, no, the Texas floods, remember, we proved it wasn't true. You're crazy. You're crazy for talking about this. And they're going to hang their hat on it. And we've seen this in the past with all kinds of things that happen in recent years. They'll get one thing, and then they'll hang their hat on it and say, this is our evidence. This is our proof that you guys are crazy and just conspiracy theorists, and nothing alarming is happening here. And then they'll hang their hat on it, for the rest of the time. And so that's my prediction. I think that we're going to keep seeing this. I will say, specifically about the Rainmaker, I do not think that the Rainmaker cloud seeding actually caused the Texas floods. I'm sure a lot of people probably do. I know it's suspicious because it's 150 miles away, 2 days before. But from my looking into it, I really don't think that their cloud seeding was enough to actually cause something like that. I do think that the natural explanations are a lot more convincing for me. But again, this is what I'm pointing out here is what is, because this was brought up, right? What it's going to do is it's going to embolden the official narrative protectors. Every time that weather manipulation gets brought up again in the future, they're going to point back and be like, hey, remember you guys said that the Rainmaker caused these floods and you were wrong and we proved it. So therefore you're all crazy, and that discredits everything that you're saying. So I'm pointing out is, one, my opinion, no, the Rainmaker cloud seeding did not cause the floods. I don't think that they did. That's my personal assessment of it. But two, I think that we're going to keep hearing about this because people are going to want to protect the official narrative, and they're going to use this to try to disregard all of the real evidence and real things that are being brought forth about any other weather manipulation that's occurring and saying, hey, this is not really happening. You guys are nuts. Just go back and look at the go back and look at the flood situation, right? So that's kind of my general take on it. I think that's what we're seeing by the mainstream media. I think we're going to my prediction is we're going to keep seeing a level of gaslighting that says, no, there's not really geoengineering happening. But at the same time, the mainstream media is going to keep pushing the lie around the climate change narrative. And they're going to continue slowly trying to coax the public into selling them the idea that we need geoengineering. At the same time, condemning conspiracy theorists for talking about geoengineering, they're going to keep trying to coax you in and sell you on, actually, we need geoengineering. We need it to save us from climate change, right? And so that is, that's my prediction. You're going to keep seeing a lot more of that happening. And the more and more it happens, I think the more credence it lends to maybe there really is, geoengineering occurring. Why else would they not be? Why do they feel the need to coax us into this idea? Like, this is something we need to start to accept. It's a good thing. You want geoengineering. It's going to save the planet, all those kinds of things. So that pretty much covers the topic for today. I did want a quick call back to a previous episode we did. If you want to see our whole team talk more about climate change, geoengineering, we did a great topic on this blackouts in Europe's conversation that we did. And Ryan hit a lot on the geoengineering stuff, which I thought was really interesting. Thank you guys for sticking around. I know this is a lengthier one. This is just my friendly reminder. Again, don't believe every single conspiratorial claim you see online. As soon as something happens and everybody has an explanation for it, don't just immediately believe the conspiratorial claims. I love a good conspiracy theory as much as anybody else. I do think that they oftentimes turn out to be true, at least in some regard, but we do need to have, real reasoning and analysis and actually looking for real evidence occurring and not just saying, oh yeah, of course, this cloud seeding that happened, of course it caused it. There's no other explanation. And it's like, well, there are other explanations. However, at the same time, friendly reminder to not allow the mainstream media to slowly gaslight you and subtly manipulate you into letting Bill Gates block out the sun and destroy humanity, because that's like a real thing that's actually attempting to be done. Whether or not they're actually trying to destroy humanity or not, that would be a worst case scenario of what would occur if you let people like Bill Gates do whatever they want to do, right, to the environment. So that's hopefully my level-headed take between these two things. And thank you all so much for joining in on my rant and lecture. And until next time, God bless.